Thanks, boys and girls, for having this paper out. Go ahead and flip it to the back. We are going to talk about Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia is that green section on the map that was on the opening agenda, and the purple area is Sumer. So let's go ahead and set our paper up. We're in the same way, the long way, and in the middle of the long way at the very top, will you please write down Mesopotamia? So this is your title, so it can be a little larger. Mesopotamia. We're in the area of Mesopotamia, okay? And this is about 3,500 BCE, which we discussed earlier. Just keeping track of some of that time. We know that there are some nicknames or other names for Mesopotamia. Let's go ahead and talk about those. One is the Fertile Crescent. So Fertile, Crescent, Crecent. It's because there's the land of the two rivers. The rivers flood. They create a fertile area right in that particular pocket, and it's crescent shaped. You know crescent rolls. You see them on TV if you've never had one. They're kind of shaped like a half moon type thing like this. So crescent shaped. It's also called the land between two rivers. It's another name for it. So you can be familiar with these different names, these different ideas. Then what are those rivers? You should be very familiar with the name Tigris and Euphrates. Euphrates is spelled Euphrates. And I should probably put an R after these to indicate river or spell the word out. But the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are just rivers you should know in this area of the Middle East. You should realize that we're talking about the area by the Mediterranean Sea, and you should have a feeling as to where this area is. We've seen it on a couple of different maps, and we'll continue to kind of look at that. So now you have this information down, and we're kind of set up to start thinking about what was in Mesopotamia. That's the area. Now what was there? So I'm going to start on my far left-hand side. You have to get 4 different groups in here. So you're thinking of your paper in 4 columns, okay? In 4 different columns. So I'm a big writer. You might be too. So plan ahead accordingly to fit 4 columns in here. Maybe you even want to sketch out real quickly what 4 columns might look like on here. And then keep your writing within there. So the first one, we've already said it, is the Sumer civilization. And that was about 3,500 BCE through about 2,300 BCE. Remember, we're getting closer to 0. So it's not that the number is less, like we think of it as just getting closer to 0. Okay, so Sumer. The Sumers had several city-states. They were not a big united group. They had a bunch of small city-states, which were almost like little tiny countries within themselves. They were all in the same area, but there were several city-states and they were not united. And this is important because this makes the civilization, but not an empire. And it makes it kind of weak because it's a little bit more susceptible to an invasion. It is considered the first civilization. We know that this could change over time. Maybe we'll find out something different as archaeologists continue to study. But as of now, Sumer is considered the first civilization. And then we know that the Sumerian people invented several things. So what did they invent? We listened to this on Hip Hughes, and we read about it in the book. But let's just list them again. The wheel, pretty big deal. Pretty big deal. Writing. How do we keep track of things? How do we document things? And then a calendar. They also did some architectural things like arches. Helps to displace weight and be able to build bigger, heavier buildings. So those were some examples. So this is Sumer. Well, as all things happen, all good things come to an end. And because the Sumerians were divided into little city-states, they weren't super organized and they became weaker and weaker. And sure enough, there's a guy to the north named Sargon. And Sargon saw an opportunity to conquer the land. And that's exactly what he did. And that leads us to our first empire. So let's go ahead and put an arrow here to show that we're proceeding through time. And we're going to write Akkadians right here. A, K, K, A, D, I, A, N, S, Akkadians. And this time frame was about 2300 BCE, before Common Era, and it lasted maybe about 200 years. You're going to notice that a lot of times once the main and most powerful emperor dies, it's hard for the people to keep up that empire. So that is a little bit what happened to the Akkadians. Once Sargon died, it was not quite as powerful, able to keep things together. Let's write a couple things down. First of all, you should know that this is the first empire. Now on trivia questions, you guys are all knowledgeable about the first civilization and the first empire. And we might want to know this name Sargon. Kind of sounds cool. Sounds like he'd be a good leader. He was strong with his military. One of the first militaries too. An organized group of people that were ready to go to fight a battle. And he was a strong political leader. That means he was a good leader in general. He had good leadership skills for his people. And one of the things he did as a good leader is that once he took over, imagine taking over this area of Sumer. It was all these little disconnected city-states. Well, what makes the Akkadians the first empire is that Sargon unites those city-states under one territory, under one leader. They might have been a little bit different. They might have even had their own language. As a matter of fact, they did. And Sargon said, you know what? I'm going to have the one language as the common uniting language. You could speak a different language at home, but there was one uniting language. And so Sargon realized the benefits of uniting all of these city-states, uniting people with one leader, and uniting people with language and customs. So this is how it starts to become the first empire. A quote says, Sargon was also a brilliant political leader. Once he established himself as king, he replaced the governors of the city-states with his own officials. He also made the Akkadian language the official language of business. Now that's right into your book in chapter 3 on page 58 and 59. So if you're curious to reread that, you can certainly go and find that part and learn a little bit more about Sargon. And so he was able to unite the people, and when he did that, he also made the first empire. Okay, so moving on. Let's go ahead and say United City States. That's pretty important because that's how we get the empire. Okay, great. So now we have 2 more to go. Not too bad. And so we're going to go ahead and make another arrow because we're moving through time. And the next empire is Babylon. And we saw it on the geohistogram today. B-A-B-Y-L-O-N. Babylon. And this time frame was about 1750 BCE through 1595 BCE. Now remember, dates are not super particular. because you might be able to find another publication that has a little bit different dates on here, because we're talking about such a long time ago, and it was hard to keep track of things and find things, and sometimes new information is found, and so we have to adjust our dates. But this is certainly gets you in the approximate time frame and understanding as how time is passing. So those, you will not need to know dates for the quiz. I will not ask you dates. That is not. This is just a frame of reference so we can understand how things are passing through time. Okay, so Babylon. There is another great leader. Imagine, great leader. And I wonder if you know his name. We've talked about him a little bit. His name is Hammurabi. And you spell Hammurabi like this. Are you ready? Capital H-A-M-M-U-R-A-B-I. H-A-M-M-U-R-A-B-I. And Hammurabi was the kind of guy who, he was another great leader because he focused on the economy. He focused on how to make things better, on how to grow things in his empire. And he was also the first leader that we know of to write down rules, laws, those kinds of things. It may be there's some conflicting evidence now. There may be some other leaders who wrote some laws down too, but certainly Hammurabi is the most famous for this and has some of the most famous still found laws available for us to look at. And we're going to take a look at that after this section. We're going to study Hammurabi's laws and his rules. Remember, he's the guy who was an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of guy. So if you poke out the eye of your neighbor, well, you know what's coming your way. It doesn't take much to figure that out. So especially during that time period when things needed to be held accountable for, he was definitely a person who was in charge of doing that. So Hammurabi had a couple things about him we should write down. He was able to make advancements with irrigation. So advanced irrigation. Now, what's the big deal about advanced irrigation? Well, the big deal about advanced irrigation means that they had more to trade, and they could therefore expand their economy. Advanced irrigation allowed for trade and advanced economy. Okay, so the advancements in irrigation allowed for more food to be produced, and now he could trade with other areas, other groups, and that advanced their economy. And he's famous for the Code of Hammurabi. If you don't know how to spell Hammurabi, we spelled it up here in slow motion, so you can just go up to that section and recopy that down. The Code of Hammurabi were written laws that included everyone. Now, maybe not everyone could read, but these laws were posted for all to see in his empire, and we'll look at some pictures of that. Gigantic tablets, stone tablets that were etched into. I wish I could show you a picture right now, but that would mean doing something tricky with the camera that I'm not aware of how to do. So we'll wait for a later date. Kind of be like a fun surprise to see the Code of Hammurabi on stone. And we're going to be analyzing his laws in an upcoming couple lessons. So you can look forward to that. And you can decide if you think the Code of Hammurabi was a good method or not so good method. After Hammurabi dies, as happens in empires, it falls apart over time. Now, we're going through this pretty quickly, boys and girls. I want to say that we could get into more detail about who took over and why they took over and how they collapsed. But given the fact that I can't talk to you and show you these things and we can't have dialogue, we're going to kind of move quickly through this. But Chapter 3 does have quite a bit about this in there. So if you're interested in learning more, you can go and read more about this in Chapter 3, Section 2. And really for your assignment coming up you will be doing a little bit more of that. But moving on, we will see that the next empire is Assyria, and that is spelled capital Assyria. And Assyria's time frame was about 900 BCE before Common Era through 600 BCE before Common Era. These guys were great warriors. They were feared. They took no prisoners. They were pretty ruthless from what we can gather. They were great warriors. Go ahead and get that down. I'll wait for you to catch up. I might have been writing a little bit fast there. Okay. Then we can write down that they were feared. They were strong. They used iron weapons, which means they had a little more, better than stick, right? Yeah. And with all of that, they had good strategy. So good fighting strategy. That is going to make them pretty fearful. Let me read you this quote. This is on page 60 of chapter 3. The Assyrians were feared for their cruelty and military might. They used strong iron weapons and became skilled horsemen. They also became highly effective at siege warfare. This technique had soldiers camp outside the city for many days, repeatedly attacking until the defenses fell. They used battering rams to destroy the walls and tall movable towers that could be rolled up to the walls and gates, allowing soldiers to climb over the walls. So much for the walls providing protection at this point with the Assyrians. And then let's just take note that they started using aqueducts to channel water away from rivers to further spots away. An aqueduct is like a pipe. And so they were the beginnings of pipes. Right now at your house, you don't live right next door to a water plant. You don't have the water filtration plant in your backyard. You know that pipes bring you water. Well, this was the beginning of using something like that, not having to be right next to the river. They actually had aqueducts that went as far as 30 miles away, which in this time frame, 600 BCE, 900 BCE-ish, that seems like a pretty incredible feat. So let's go ahead and give them credit for this, even though they're pretty fierce. They were also thinkers, and they started aqueducts. And aqueduct is spelled A-Q-U-E-D-U-C-T-S. A-Q-U-E-D-U-C-T-S. Aqueducts, which was like pipes. You could say channels. They were open, so they weren't exactly like pipes because they were open at the top to carry water. And we'll give the extreme example. There is documentation of one that was 30 miles long that the Assyrians created. And that was pretty amazing to me. Okay, so we wrote down a lot of stuff today, boys and girls. We learned a lot of stuff in record time. Again, and we all say this, the teachers are always saying, if we were only together, we could talk about this stuff. We could make a little bit more of a connection with it. We could have a little more fun with it. But I still think this is pretty interesting how over time we start with the Sumer, and it's a civilization, and they're getting along. They're learning how to have 50,000 people in a 1 square mile area. They're learning how to, they're inventing a bunch of things. They're learning how to keep food safe and distribute it and those kinds of things. Then we move on to the Akkadians with Sargon, who figures out how to unite all of these different groups of people in an area under one leader and has it all together under one leadership. Then we learn about Babylon with the great leader Hammurabi, who advances irrigation, which allows more trade and advanced economy. And he says, wait a minute, we need some rules around here so things can stay in order. And he writes them down for all to see. And then Assyria which were a group of warriors who learned how to use stronger, better weapons with great strategy, and also invented and started using aqueducts. So this is what we have for the area of Mesopotamia. Now, we said that the Sumer civilization started in southern Mesopotamia. This expands through time, and hopefully we'll have a chance to see some maps that show where these spread to. It's also, you can look on page 60 in your book. There's a map that shows Babylon, and it shows how there's the spreading of Babylonia, and so you can take a look at that. But otherwise, I think we have pretty much wrapped it up for today with our note-taking. This is something you need to keep with you. I did suggest that perhaps you could allow your, if your crew teacher was ready and willing to hold on to it for you. This, boys and girls, first of all, is worth points. And second of all, we are going to allow you to use it on your quiz Friday. So you'll want this because all of the answers will be available to you. And although you should still study and be familiar with what's in the book and what's in your guided reading, this will help you figure out those answers. So you'll want this with you. You'll want to be able to refer to this. So if you don't have something, if you missed something, go back to the videos. This part was from last week, so you can go back to the calendar and last week and review that if you need to. And then, of course, we did this whole backside today, so you can review that if you need to as well. All right, boys and girls, we will talk to you soon, and we'll be working on some additional projects referring to these new empires that we're learning about in the area of Mesopotamia. Have a great day.